Now that Chapter 5 is coming to a close, I thought it'd be a fun idea to rank every single weapon in the chapter on a tier list ranging from S tier to F tier. So kicking off our list, we have the Nemesis AR. Now in my opinion, this AR is easily the worst of the chapter. The fire rate just feels super slow on the weapon, and it reminds me a lot of the Ranger Assault Rifle from Chapter 3, which isn't a good thing by any means. So with all that said, the Nemesis AR will go straight into D tier. And next up, we have the Striker Assault Rifle. Now this AR was my go-to weapon during Season 1. It's a shame that this weapon was vaulted during Season 2 and Season 3, as I think the Striker was a lot better than the Nemesis, and it really deserved more time in the spotlight in Chapter 5 as the main assault rifle for the chapters. So with all that said, we'll throw the Striker into S tier. Next up, we have the Enforcer AR. Now this was an AR that I didn't find myself using very much at all, and it honestly might go down as one of the most forgettable items that we've ever received. Not only is this one of the weaker ARs from Chapter 5, but it might just be one of the weakest assault rifles that we've ever received. I don't have much more to say about the weapon, so we'll throw it into D tier. Next up, we have the Hammer Pump Shotgun. Now I know it's very popular to dunk on this weapon, and that's exactly what I'm here to do. I'm a massive sucker for shotguns in Fortnite, and I firmly believe you can't get any better than a classic pump shotgun. However, the Hammer Pump Shotgun takes everything beneficial about a pump and throws it out of the window. Yes, the downtime between shots is long, and the reload time is a little long, but both of those are to be expected from a pump. The problem is, it feels like you're hitting your opponent with a rubber duck when you actually hit them with this weapon, so we'll throw it into F tier. And sticking with shotguns from Chapter 5, we have the Frenzy Auto. Now this shotgun was pretty broken, especially in Season 1 with Oscar's Mythic, but I wasn't a huge fan of the base version. The shotgun did a decent amount of damage, but the reload time on the weapon just wasn't for me. However, this was still a pretty solid weapon if you enjoyed it, landing it in B tier. And oh boy, next up, we have the Burst SMG. Call it glazing, but I really don't care, because this is one of the best weapons to ever grace the Fortnite community. I mean, this SMG could truly do it all. The recoil is pretty manageable since it was a burst, and in fact, the recoil was so manageable that you could hip fire with this weapon and it would still shred through enemy players. Not to mention, the range on this SMG was fantastic, and it also packed a great amount of damage. So without a doubt, the Burst SMG will go into S tier. Next up, we have the Hyper SMG. Now this is a weird one for me because I don't love the weapon, but I also don't hate it. It's just your standard run-of-the-mill SMG with a decent fire rate and a little bit of recoil. However, there was never a season during the chapter where this was my go-to SMG, but I don't mind using it if I have to. So with all that said, we'll throw it into B tier. Next up on the list, we have the Ranger Pistol. Now of course, this is just a pistol, so there's not anything too special about the weapon. If you're like me, you only really use it if it's the first weapon that you find, or since it's rapid fire, you use it as a SMG slot if the rarity is high enough. Now I personally enjoy the tactical pistol more from Chapter 4, but I'll take the Ranger Pistol over the majority of pistols in Fortnite, so we'll throw it into B tier. Next up, we have one of my favorite snipers of all time with the Reaper Sniper. Now this sniper feels very similar to the 100 bolt action that we received in Chapter 3, which is also one of my favorite snipers as well. No matter the optic that you put on the Reaper Sniper in this chapter, I just feel like it was impossible to miss with the weapon, and this is without a doubt one of my favorite weapons from the chapter and in all of Fortnite, so we'll put it into S tier. Next up, we have the Warforged AR. Now this was my go-to AR in Season 2, especially since they vaulted the Striker after Season 1. It certainly was the better choice over the Nemesis AR, and at times the Warforged AR felt like it was the most powerful AR in the game. I still think I enjoy the Striker more, but the Warforged AR was great, so we'll throw it into A tier. Next up, we have the Huntress DMR. Now I've never really been a fan of DMRs since they were introduced back in Chapter 3, and I've always thought that snipers were far superior. And though I feel the exact same way still, the Huntress DMR is easily the best one that we've received, so we'll put it into B tier. Next up, we have the Gatekeeper Shotgun. Now this has been my go-to shotgun for Season 2 and Season 4. It's a fantastic shotgun with close range, and I don't think many people will argue that the Gatekeeper is the most reliable and consistent shotgun in the Chapter 5 loot pool, so we'll throw it into S tier. Next up, we have the Harbinger SMG. Now this entry is a little bit of a toss-up for me, as I don't think the weapon's bad, but it's certainly my least favorite SMG from the chapter. I don't really have much more to say other than I don't enjoy using it, and it's always my last resort for an SMG, so we'll put it into C tier. tier. And sticking with SMGs, we have the drum gun from Season 2. Now this was reintroduced when Midas made his way back to the island, complete with a brand new remodel for Chapter 5. I liked the weapon, but it was never my go-to during Season 2, which has a lot to do with the Burst SMG being in the loot pool for Season 2, rather than the drum gun being a bad weapon. So we'll throw the drum gun into B tier. Now you might think some of these picks are crazy, but what's even crazier is the fact that over 90% of you guys aren't subscribed. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, as it goes a long way in supporting the channel, and you'll also make this little frog that I named Bart very happy. Next up, we have another weapon that's been repurposed for Chapter 5 with the hand cannon. Now this weapon is pretty much a tiny sniper, especially when you put a red dot on the weapon using a mod bench. And while the weapon is pretty satisfying to use, once again it's just another pistol, and I never really find myself using it, so we'll throw it into B tier. Next up, we have the tactical AR. Now this one's a bit of a toss-up for me, as I've really enjoyed the previous versions of the TAC AR, especially the version from Chapter 4 Season 1, but I feel like the Chapter 5 version is a little bit lackluster. The damage that it deals isn't very impressive, and when compared to the other ARs in Chapter 5, it certainly doesn't hold up very well. I'd still take it over ARs like the Nemesis and the Enforcer, but I certainly wouldn't take it over ARs like the Striker or the Warforged. So with all that said, I'll have to put the TAC AR into B tier. Next up, we have the Combat Assault Rifle. Now this AR might have had a high recoil, but if you're able to manage the recoil, this assault rifle absolutely shreds, especially the Machinist version in Season 3. So with all that said, I'll throw the Combat Assault Rifle into A tier. Next up, we have the Combat Shotgun. Now this shotgun was a weapon I didn't really enjoy the first time around in Chapter 1 or Chapter 2, but of course, like many other weapons, they redid this weapon with a brand new version for Chapter 5. And honestly, it quickly became my go-to shotgun in Season 3, so we'll put it into S tier. Next up, we have the Boom Bolt from Season 3. Now this weapon was one of my go-tos in every match for Season 3. You could do a lot of damage against players with it, but why it was so useful in Season 3 is because the weapon was extremely effective in countering cars. So while it was pretty effective against enemy players, it was more so effective against cars, so we'll take that into consideration and put it into A tier. Next up, we have the Tri-Beam from Season 3. Now this was a weapon I never really used unless I had to. It was pretty decent against cars, but it wasn't very effective against players, so we'll put it into C tier. And sticking to Season 3 weapons, we have the Heavy Impact Sniper. Now you might already know that I love snipers, but this sniper just wasn't for me. And that's probably due to the fact that the main purpose of the sniper was to counter cars, and it wasn't very effective against players. But even using it against cars, the sniper felt pretty sluggish, but hey, it did have a cool reload animation, so we'll throw it into D tier. And moving into Season 4, we have the Striker Burst. I've absolutely shredded players from long range with this weapon all season, and I'll be so sad when it gets removed, presumably at the start of Chapter 6. So with all that said, we're going to put the Striker Burst Assault Rifle into S tier. Next up, we have the Sovereign Shotgun. Now I've seen a lot of mixed reception on this weapon, but in all honesty, I don't understand the hate because I really enjoyed this weapon, so we'll throw it into A tier. Next up, we have the dual Micro SMGs. Now these SMGs were introduced in Season 4, and they've been a staple in my loadout all throughout the season. I love close range fights, and these SMGs absolutely shred through players at close range. And some players might not like them as much as I do, but I have to put them into S tier. And finally, to wrap up the loot pool, we have the Monarch Pistol from Season 4. And while I don't use this weapon a ton, I think the weapon is pretty solid. It feels a lot like the Deagle, which was always one of my favorite pistols in Fortnite. And since we don't have a sniper in the game for Season 4, the Monarch Pistol is pretty useful at long range, so we'll throw it into B tier. Be sure you let me know your rankings down in the comments below, and what you thought about the loot pool overall for the chapter. But until next time guys, as always, take care and stay twisty.